Amen. Amen. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, worship team. Thank you, Aiden. Good morning. Some of you that have been attending HighPoint for 3 whole weeks are going, where's Pastor Ross? He's the guy that stands up here. For the rest of you that wondered if I had been raptured and you missed it, too bad I didn't. You didn't miss it. It's okay. I want to welcome our friends online as well. HighPoint St. Thomas, glad you're here. The last 3 weeks, Jennifer and I have been helping some of our churches around the world. So we had an opportunity to work with one of our congregations in the Middle East. The last couple weeks, we've been working with several of our congregations while suffering for Jesus in Hawaii. And let me just tell you that our body, our family of churches is well, is healthy. Some of the things that Pastor Ross has been sharing that have been going on at Asbury, that's breaking out all over the place. Even in Hawaii. We don't hear about it in Hawaii because it's disconnected by a 5-hour flight from an ocean, but God is doing extraordinary things in our midst. And despite getting to go to some different places and help, can I tell you there's no place like home. There is no people I would rather spend my life with, no people I would rather share God's word with, no people I'd rather see the kingdom extended with and seek our Father together than with you. So it's a great privilege to be back home. And man, what a time to be alive, huh? This might be the most exciting time to be a follower of Jesus, at least in my lifetime. I would go so far as to say maybe in American history. What a time we have for the light of the gospel to shine bright. And we're in a series called Grit, and hopefully in this series called Grit, you're grabbing hold of how to keep that light shining bright. Because not only are we in exciting times now where we're going to need grit, we're coming into even more exciting times, if you will, where we're going to need possibly even more grit. So I hope we're grabbing hold of this concept. We're going to be in 2 Timothy chapter 4 today. 2 Timothy 4, we're going to read verses 6 through 8, and it goes like this. For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth, it's just a great word, henceforth. There is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. As we've been working through this grit series that we'll be concluding today, we've talked about so far endurance and perseverance. And if we're going to endure or we're going to persevere through challenging things, there really needs to be a compelling why. In my professional basketball career, I had day after year after year of grueling physical and mental workouts. And I didn't just do it because I had nothing better to do, but at least at that season in my life, there was a compelling why that someday I might have the possibility of a victory. So you do things when no one is looking so that when the lights are on, you just might be able to answer that call. And when we think of spiritually enduring or persevering, there is a much more compelling why than possibly winning a championship. There's a compelling why as we learn that endurance and perseverance produce things in us. They produce character, we learned. They produce, what's the other thing that they produce? They produce maturity. And they produce hope. I would venture to say that those things actually, I don't think, can really be produced any other way than by enduring or pressing through difficult things. I don't think they can be produced any other way. Even if they could, they're certainly not produced by avoiding difficult things. So it's in the process of enduring, of girding up, of pressing through, of persevering, that God builds things on the inside of us, leading up to hope that we're going to need to enjoy this life and the one yet to come. And we're going to look at this, a different kind of last sort of kind of key component of having grit, that once we've developed character and we've developed maturity and we're living in hope from enduring and persevering, if you just string those together for a long period of time, you'll develop a life of overcoming, which we're going to talk about today, this idea of overcoming. Our passage starts off in verse 6, and this is the Apostle Paul writing, and he says, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure has come." The time of his departure has come. That doesn't mean Paul's like about to go on a journey or he's going to move. It means Paul is crystal clear that this is the end of his life. 2 Timothy is the last letter that we have of Paul in canonized scripture, and he's writing to his young protege, a man that he's discipled, a man that he's mentored, a man that he's encouraged in his faith. And Timothy is receiving this as sort of a last will and testament, kind of a last go-get-him tiger from his mentor. And my friends, what we can see, even in Paul talking to Timothy about how to overcome, is that we can see there's real value in learning from those who have gone before us. Real value. One of the beautiful things of a multi-generational church where we've got middle schoolers and high schoolers standing here with grandparents and worshiping together is that we can learn from those who have run their leg of the race well. I think one of the great challenges of a segmented society is that we just learn from those who are in the same stage as us. I'll never forget when Jennifer and I first started HighPoint as we currently know it. It was a grind, to say the least. I've heard church planting described as a series of near-death experiences, and I would agree with that. And we were, man, our kids were young and, first grade and second grade, and there's like no time to do anything because you have no staff, no team. I mean, I was the graphics guy and technology guy. Just to let you know, those of you that know me, know that like, dear God, how did we survive? I don't know. The grace of God. But Jennifer and I were pretty much doing everything, and we were just like, whew, man, we were sucking wind. So we joined like this little like cohort of other church planters, and we're like, let's just, misery loves company. Let's just get together. But the hope was that we would be able to maybe learn some things from them, because while we were getting the church moving, we were almost becoming like business partners in the process. And our marriage was starting to kind of lose a little bit of its luster. I'll never forget, we're sitting in this group of other church planters, and I'm like, okay, hey, as long as we're having a vulnerable moment, how are y'all like making your marriages work in the middle of trying to get something off the ground for God? And I'll never forget, one guy a little bit younger than us was sitting there, and he goes, well, you just need to take a date night every week. And I'm like, I've dispensed that wisdom to couples before. Like, just take a date night every week. And I said, that's a great idea. Nothing new, but great idea. How in the middle of planting a church do you find the time to take a date night every week? And he goes, I don't know. We haven't started our church yet. Next, I like turned to one of the old guys. I'm like, how did you do it? Because oftentimes what happens is we turn to our peers, our right and left, and go, is what we're doing working? I don't know. Is what we're doing working? And we just kind of, to feel good in what we're deciding, we just go, yeah, this is best. And we don't know until the fruit of our life decisions start to show themselves. So we see Paul writing to Timothy, and Timothy can look at Paul's life at the end, a life that is overcome, a life that was marked by endurance and marked by perseverance, and he can look at the road and say, someday I might end up where this guy is. Now, it doesn't initially look good because Paul's writing him from prison. But he says, I've been poured out, already being poured out as a drink offering. That's a compelling why to me. A drink offering up until, in the history of God moving with his people, up until this moment, a drink offering was where you take the most valuable wine that you had. And it was both a daily offering and a really important seasonal offering, where when we're bringing an offering to God to burn or to whatever, you would also take some of the valuable wine that could be used for great merriment. It could be used to really impress your friends. It could be used to make your own heart glad. There's a lot of things you could do with this wine, and what you would instead do would be to pour it out at the foot of the altar. And look at what Paul's saying. he's comparing his own life. He's taking the best of the things that could have brought him joy. He's taking all that he had access to as a learned man and as a well-respected man, and he's saying, I'm taking all the best of my days, the best of my strength, the best of my faith, the best of my privilege, the best of my access, and I am just going to pour that out at the foot of the cross. Meaning that I'm going to live my life as if everything that I am and everything that I have is a gift that I get to give back to Jesus. He gave the best of who he is to the greatest cause possible. He sacrificed deeply of his own temporal and fleeting pleasure for a cause that is eternal. And God, honoring his life, was lived as a gift to God. What a epitaph on a headstone. I poured out my life as a drink offering. What do you want to be said of you at the end of your life? What would you like to be said of you? If we could sum it up in a phrase, when your days are done. Are you making decisions now that will lead you to that place? Paul was at the end, and he's looking back and recounting and says, this is what the totality of my life can be summed up here. And likely along the way, he had to make decisions. Should I do this or should I not do this? Should I veer to the right and press through to God, or should I let go of certain things? How about you? What are things that need to be added to your life actively today so that what you want to be said of you at the end can possibly come to fruition? What are things that need to be dropped from your life starting today so that God's dream for you can get all the way to fruition? What do you need to overcome so that that can become a reality? Look at how Paul, saying he's been poured out, look at how he starts to describe as he's reflecting back on his life. He tells us this in verse 7, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. He fought the good fight. The fight of endurance and the fight of perseverance and the fight to overcome. My friends, it is a fight, but it is a good fight to have. Not all fights that you're invited to should you engage in. But the ones that God leads you to, absolutely, it's good to fight those. It's good because of what gets produced. Maturity, character, hope, over an extended period of time, a life that's a gift to God. It says that he finished the race. He didn't merely run it, but he finished it. And he finished it well. I had a very brief but illustrious track career. My sister was a runner, still is a runner. She's one of those weird people that takes delight in running. She gets this thing, I'm like, why do you run? And she's like, oh, I get this runner's high. I'm like, never heard of it. My knees hurt, my feet hurt, and I'm sore for about 2 weeks. I don't like running. But she talked me, when I was in early middle school, she talked me into joining a track meet. It was like when these AAU Junior Olympic things, and you had to sign up in advance. And I'm like, yeah, sign me up. So I sign up, and she's like, you want to go training? And I'm like, absolutely not. You want to go for a run? Why would I do that? I'm going to run on race day. Why would I run before that? I got one in me, right? I'm not going to use it up on a training. So the day of the race, I'm doing the 400, which is a full lap around the track, which it didn't used to look so long, but all of a sudden, when you're actually contemplating racing it, I'm like, hey. So race day, about 40 minutes, 30 minutes before the race, I suddenly have this random thought of that track looks long, I better get in shape. 30 minutes before the race. So I went over and found a hill and started sprinting up and down this hill to magically get in shape. I am soaked in sweat, and completely exhausted, and they call for the 400, and I'm like, oh man, like my legs are on fire, my heart's beating. I'm like, well, hopefully I'm in shape now. So I get in the blocks, gun goes off, and let me tell you, I took off like a rocket. I am smoking everybody. That was my illustrious track career for those first 50 yards. And then I hit a wall. I mean, it felt like a gorilla like jumped out of this, like King Kong landed on my back. And everybody just, slow and steady wins the race. Everybody just slow and steadied right past me. And I'm thinking, if there had been like a turnoff to the locker room, I would have taken it. And if there had been like a little drive-through, I could have just pulled it. But it's not. I'm out there in the middle of the track with everybody watching me, and I'm thinking, just don't walk. Just don't walk. And then I'm walking, and I'm thinking, just don't stop walking. And then I kind of stop walking for a minute. I'm like, just don't lay down. I mean, just at least stay vertical. So I basically did this for about half the track. I finished. I didn't finish well. Here's what Paul's saying here. If you're going to run the race, if you're going to run the race with endurance, and you're going to run the race with perseverance, and you're going to overcome to where you'd be able to look back on your life and go, man, I did what Jesus put me on this planet to do, and now I'm giving him the totality of my days. If you're going to do that, my friends, it's not just how you start. You don't get ready for that in an instant. You sign up in an instant, and then every day you make small choices to walk well with him. And over time, the race gets more challenging, and over time, the obstacles get a little bit higher, and over time, the track gets a little bit longer. And in the process of enduring and persevering, before long, you look back and go, wow, I've covered some ground. Listen, get across the finish line somehow, right? Don't stop and lay down. But we're not meant to have a Christianity that is like sprints and stops and sprints and stops and spurts and bursts and then fall off and then run hard for a little bit and hope God's pleased and then like crash and burn. That's not the race he's laid out for us. It is just every day walk with him. Paul said he finished, didn't just start, he finished his race. And then he said he kept the faith. What would it look like if you saw every opportunity in every moment, every occasion of your life as an opportunity to glorify God? None of the hard things would be reasons to stop serving him, because every difficult thing would actually be an occasion that God could be glorified through your endurance. Every setback, every moment where we go, God, the things that tempt us to go, I don't know if you're good or not, God. If we saw those as God-ordained opportunities through which we can glorify his name, we now see everything he brings us as a gift. That's how Paul can say things like, man, I rejoice, as we've learned in the last couple weeks. Peter can say things, I rejoice at the challenges, at the difficulties. I'm excited about them because whether it's an easy thing, whether it's a thing that I also get blessed in the process, or whether it's a challenge, in all things that come my way, I can live in such a way and walk with him in such a way that he receives glory. Every one of them. There's no reason not to serve him. But everything that he brings us is just a chance to give him glory. Lest we think that Paul's race wasn't challenging, I want to slide over real quick to 2 Corinthians chapter 11, and let's look at his description of his race. He starts off in verse 24 and says this, 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews 40 lashes less one. It means he got whipped 39 times. 5 times. As of this writing, 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned, not in a Colorado kind of way. 3 times I was shipwrecked, because you're going, well, that's how he got through it. That is not how he got through it. Some of y'all don't know what I'm talking about, and bless your heart. All right, anyway. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A day and a night I was adrift at sea. That's like my worst fear, by the way, as a guy who loves boats, is to like have your boat sink and like just sit there and bob like a cork, hoping someone finds you. Anyway, I feel so much better. That was cathartic. Verse 26, on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, danger from robbers, dangers from my own people, dangers from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, dangers from false brothers, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless nights, my other greatest fear, in hunger and thirst, often without food, fear number 1, in cold and exposure, and apart from other things, there's the daily pressure on me of my anxiety for all the churches. Who's weak? Am I not weak? Who's made to fail? Am I not indignant? If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. Listen to what Paul is saying here. He's not saying, look how tough I am. I went through all of this. You know what? I trained for this. I was ready to do an Ironman. I was practicing treading water so I could bob out there for a day and night. Man, I buffeted my flesh so those whips were nothing. He's not saying I was prepared for it. He's not saying I was tough enough for it. He's not saying I trained for it. When he says weakness, what he's saying is, if I were to stand here and look at those things, there is nothing in me, not one thing in me that has the capacity to endure those. Nothing. And yet, he's through them. And he's looking back on them. And what he's now doing is boasting that a guy who could not, in any capacity, with the fragility of his own flesh, could not go through those, and yet he's passed them. It's like, man, I can boast in that. But what we're going to find out is he's not boasting that he got through them. He says, the God and Father of the Lord Jesus Christ, who is blessed forever. He knows that I'm not lying. At Damascus, the governor under King Aretas was guarding the city of Damascus. This is found in Acts chapter 9, by the way, in order to seize me, but I was let down in a basket through a window in the wall and escaped his hands. This is a tough list. And this is what Paul identifies as the good fight. It is through these things that Paul kept running and didn't quit. It is through all of these challenges that Paul kept a vibrant faith and a love for Jesus. It's remarkable. Oh, by the way, again, Paul wrote all of this, and there were 8 chapters of the book of Acts still yet to be lived. So this is not the full list. If you know what happens in Acts chapter 20 through 28, it looks a lot like this. But this isn't what he's recounting. He's recounting the stuff prior to that. Here's what Paul's saying, is that you and I don't need the strength to overcome everything. He's bragging in his weakness, which means you and I don't need a certain amount of strength to endure. You and I don't need a certain amount of internal fortitude to persevere. We only need, please hear me, we only need the strength and the conviction to decide to keep serving and following Jesus. Y'all aren't hearing me. When you look at the obstacles ahead, they become daunting and they become overwhelming. And it can be like, how am I going to bob in the sea? Oh my gosh, they're whipping. Oh no, the whipping's coming again. How are they going to how can you possibly have the strength for that? You can't. Nor should you try to. All you need is the strength of one absolute, unshakable decision that I will follow Jesus and serve Jesus no matter what. That's it. Every one of us is capable of one decision. And then wherever that decision leads you, just don't come unanchored from that one decision. How did Paul get through things he was incapable of getting through? He did the only thing he was capable of doing, which is serving and following Jesus. And in the process of serving and following Jesus, Jesus carries him through the water, the storm, the beatings, Colorado, all the stuff. And all he has to do is walk with Jesus, and Jesus takes care of the capacity to get through things he's not able to. We simply need the strength to make one absolute decision. And it sounds like this: I will never, under any circumstances, stop following Jesus. I will never, under any circumstances, not walk with him. So when something comes my way, it's not like, oh, is this another thing that I have to overcome? No. It's just the same decision that I've already made, and I just make it again. I just decide to hold to the only decision about my life that's actually worth anything. And we need to make that decision when life is hard, and we need to make that decision when life's amazing. When we're blessed, when we're prosperous, when God is showing up, when God is visiting us, when God is doing the miraculous in our midst. What do? Chase stuff? Just follow him. That's it. One decision. Because what we find from Paul is he tells us this challenge that he went through over and over and over. But then he shifts at the beginning of the next chapter and starts telling us, by the way, I went up into the third heaven and I saw things yet to come. And what's the third heaven? Don't worry about it. Paul is having revelation and experiences with God on the good side, developing in him a compelling why to just follow Jesus everywhere. And then he starts telling us with regards to this in 2 Corinthians 12, verse 7 through 10, so to keep me from becoming conceited because of all the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in you. If you're in a difficult situation and you've cried out to God and he didn't answer, and you've cried out to God and he didn't answer, you're in good company, because that's what Paul just said. Man, I had to ask him 3 times. The first 2, it was like I was yelling into the atmosphere. So let's just hold on to this. And by the way, we see Jesus in his greatest trial pray 3 times. Oh, Lord, take this away. Oh, Lord, take this away. Oh, Lord, I don't have the strength to go through this. Please take this away. And God's answer to Jesus and God's answer to Paul is the same answer to us. Sometimes he just doesn't give you an answer. But maybe if you keep asking, he'll give you enough answer that's just commit to follow me. That's it. I'll take care of where you go, and I'll take care of what you need. You just decide, like Jesus did, well, but not my will, but yours. Because my life is not about me and not about those things that I have the strength for, because Jesus, who was God and fully man, said, hey, Father, help a brother out and take this from me. I don't want to do that. There's a moment where he's understanding what is before him. And everything in his flesh says, I don't have the strength for that. And then he comes back to, I don't need the strength for that. I just need the strength for one decision to say yes to you and follow you no matter what. If I can make that decision, according to, look what God's answer to Paul, But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Now, Paul, returning to talk, says, therefore, I'll boast all the more gladly in my weaknesses. I'll tell you all kinds of things I can't do that I've done. All things that I never had the capacity to do. Even as I went through them, there was nothing in me that could have done it. For the sake of, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. Why? For when I am weak, then I'm actually strong. Look at what this passage is saying. God's power is made perfect in our weakness, in our inability to do what is in front of us. His power is made perfect. It means that the most perfect manifestation of God's power is not when we ask God to join us in something and give us that extra turbo boost to get through it. His power, the perfect manifestation of his power, is when we go, there is nothing in me that can possibly endure this, but I'm going to make a choice to walk with you. Then the only power that I'm going to rely on is what he provides to get through that which I can't. So what he's saying is, if you will willingly move through the challenges that God brings your way, you will find a grace that is sufficient for you that you may not currently know is possible. If you will embrace and move through those things that God is calling you to move through that you cannot actually move through in following him into and through those, you will actually experience power that you don't currently have to get through them. You discover that in times of seeming weakness that completely overwhelm us physically and completely overwhelm us mentally and completely overwhelm us emotionally, that we and then we just decide we're going to move through them because it's what God has for us. You do so by a strength that is currently beyond you. When a challenge or a setback comes, and we continue to move through it, though unable to move through it, it's a strength beyond you that carries you. And the next thing you know, by just honoring your decision to follow Jesus, you have overcome something that you could not overcome. In other words, the decision to keep our eyes on Jesus, that's the only decision. And then it is actually up to him where he leads you. And if he leads you into things that you cannot bear, then it is up to him, and he is faithful, to provide and extend to you grace that's sufficient. Your job in all of this, decide to stay with him. And look what overcoming produces, because you might go, you know what, I'm okay. I have a get out of hell free. I can just go to heaven whenever he takes me. Why would I continue through this? Well, first of all, there are things that you can experience in God here in this earth that you cannot experience any other way. There are things that you will know about God, that you will know, that you know, that you know, that you know, that are true about God, that cannot be known any other way than him putting you in a position where you have to experience it firsthand. Oh, by the way, there's a much more compelling why, in my humble opinion, than that. It actually produces, if endurance and perseverance produce character and hope and maturity here, overcoming, which is the repeated endurance and faith, produces things for eternity. Let's go back to 2 Timothy and look how Paul concludes that verse. He says, henceforth, there's that great word, there is laid up for me. Laid up means it's awaiting me. There is something that is yet to come. There's laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing. What's he saying? He's emphasizing God's righteous nature, which means that he's just. Which means if something is poured out here that would feel unfair and unjust in the service of him, he's a just God who has the capacity, it says, to award, which means to restore that which was paid here. That means two things. It doesn't mean that God somehow owes you something. He doesn't owe you something. But out of his just nature, a heavy payment to follow him here is met with even greater reward in eternity from him. Is anybody excited about that? If you have paid any price to follow God, if it's cost you friendships that seem like, man, I don't know if it's worth it, and those friendships don't immediately get restored here, you have a just God who will restore things for always. If it's cost you money, you've invested, you've sown, you've poured out the financial ramifications of your labor, and you've poured those into the kingdom willingly and voluntarily, and consequently live on less that the kingdom might have more to be expanded. And you're going, and people look at you like you're crazy, like you could have bought a better car. And you go, I know it's kind of weird, but hey, somebody might have needed it. Or I know I personally have less and I work awfully hard for it and I get it, but God might, the kingdom might be extended while I'm here, and it feels like a hardship and it feels like suffering, and you're willing to give. Let me tell you, there is a God who is just, and he restores for all eternity. A price paid here to follow him is met with reward for having followed him. And you might be thinking, well, that's sure true for the Apostle Paul. No, it's true not only for him, this verse tells us, but for all. Put it back up. We're almost there. But to all who have loved his appearing. What does that mean? For any of us who live toward God the way he lives toward us. This word here is agape, the kind of love that God lavishes on you that's not based on your performance, that's not based on your conditions. So if we choose to love him, not based on our circumstances, if I choose to follow him, not based on the gigantic obstacle that might stand in front of me, that I choose to love him and enjoy him and delight in him, it's one decision. That I will delight in my God with every fiber of my being, and a bunch of painful stuff comes your way. For those who choose to love him and aren't swayed by their circumstances, my friends, there's treasure. There's the presence of God for all time. And in any ways that this just God decides to delight in you for the price you paid for him here. Paul looked at that and said, man, that's worth 5 whippings of only 39 lashes. That's worth being hit with a rod on 3 different occasions. Man, that's worth having, when I'm in Acts chapter 9, been a Christian for a year or 2, and they decide I'm having such an impact that they want to kill me, and my friends had to stick me in a basket and lower me out a window. Dude, that's nothing. I know it sounds like a lot, but listen, I'm the weakest guy. That isn't, please don't look at me, Paul's saying, as like some superhero of courage and faith. He said, I'm weak, but what I've figured out is I actually don't have to be strong. All I have to do is decide one thing. And in my decision of one thing, that I will not ever stop following God. If I decide that, He provides for me the capacity to handle whatever the world throws at me. And His handling of that, the strength to handle that, yeah, it's just perfect. The grace to handle it, much more grace than I have. All I did was decide. Worship team, can you help me out? Do you want to develop grit? We're going to need grit for the very exciting days ahead. You will be presented with more opportunities than you could possibly imagine at this point in time. You'll be presented with more opportunities to stop following Jesus than you ever had. The days ahead, it's not going to be financially profitable to follow Jesus. All right. The days ahead might cost you to follow Jesus. The days ahead might get you canceled online to follow Jesus. Yeah, this is exciting. The culture might become more hostile to the truths to which we ascribe. Whew. It feels daunting. How do we handle culture? Well, you don't have to handle culture. You just make one decision. And no matter what comes, I'm going to follow Jesus. And as you follow Him, you're all of a sudden going to look back and go, whoa, I just endured some challenging things I didn't even know possible. And then you just make a decision that you're going to follow Jesus no matter what. And before long, you'll have persevered through things that you didn't think you could. And then you're just going to continue to follow Jesus. And at some point, you'll be like Paul, and you'll be looking at the end, and you'll look back. And you may look back and go, man, I flinched a bunch. And I didn't do it. You know what? I didn't fight. I ducked the fight. Or you'll look back and say, oh my goodness. Jesus took me over some serious mountains that I did not know that I could have. Wow, I didn't even know I was fighting a fight, but here I stand, kind of battered and bruised, but I still am just making decisions to follow Him. Someday you're going to get to sum up your days. And if you will let grit settle into your soul to where you just decide to hold on to Him, you're going to have a strong statement to be able to make at the end. How do we develop grit? Keep your eyes on the prize. The prize is what God produces in us. And then keep your eyes, most importantly, on the prize giver, our beautiful and glorious God who endured the cross, who overcame death, and He's got the strength to overcome everything that comes your way. Jesus, we love You. We thank You. We honor You. We bless You. You're such a good God. Help us be people of grit. In Jesus' name.